Beautiful people. So today, probably the same day if you're going in order with these tutorials, but this class is going to be the class where you're going to learn mixing in depth. Now, the track we're going to be using for this class is also going to be a Linkin Park track. I'm probably going to be using Linkin Park tracks for the rest of these classes just because they make their masters widely available over the internet. It's easier for me to do it, and plus they're popular, so you guys can tell like the exact mixing techniques of popular songs that have sold a lot of records. So, for mixing, again, the main focus is to make everything sound clear. This means taking out anything and every single thing that is not necessary. Anything that does not contribute to the final product, even minimally, is taken out. You need room. You need to make room for all of these instruments that you're using. So if you have too many, take them out. If you have too many frequencies in one instrument that's taking up, say you have a guitar that's taking up parts of the drum, parts of the vocals and stuff, take that shit out. Just rule of thumb, just take it out. And this leads into my first point, which is to only use subtractive mixing, which means subtractive EQ, which means, say, I'm going to play this guitar right now for you guys. I'm going to see where it hits on the EQ. Now, we can kind of see it's really cut at about 7K, which means that even if we cut it ourselves, you wouldn't hear any difference because there's nothing playing there. Same thing for, there's not necessarily a cut below 100, but it definitely ducks off. So you could even just mimic it, doing that exact same thing that the engineer did. And you can see pretty much you can mimic any sort of EQ by looking where it hits on this. You could just see, this is where it hits before without the EQ anyway. So I'm going to take those changes that I made off really quick. But the reason you use subtractive EQ is because you need to take out anything inaudible, unnecessary, in the way of any other instruments to make room for other ones. The reason you don't gain is because you don't make it louder during the EQ stage. Use the EQ to take out what's unnecessary and use the compressor to bring out what's left to make it clear. The volume of the frequencies you normally would want to raise, so say I wanted to raise the mid of it to make it sound like this, whatever you want to make it sound like. If I would be taking out the bottom and the top of it and then compressing it, it would only be compressing this part of it. And if you really want to go straight into a certain frequency and compress it, use a multi-band compressor to bring it out, not an EQ. It's not the best way to do it. It's not what most people use. Some people can do unsubtractive EQ, which means you add frequencies, but for a beginner, and really anyone, I would recommend only doing subtractive EQ. Working outside in with EQs is usually best, is what I've learned, which means that instead of going and trying to fine-tune the middle of it and whatnot, you would be taking out the top end, the bottom end, and anything you really don't need, because that's the top and bottom ends usually the stuff you're going to be cutting completely out. You can still use subtractive EQ that's not cutting, like I mentioned in the previous episode. If you're doing an EQ where you're cutting and then compressing to bring it out, you can do another EQ after to do the fine-tuning, because that EQ is going to be affected by the compressor and you'll get the best results that way. Again, remember, EQ cut, then compressor, then another EQ if you want to fine-tune. These are what's known as dynamic effects, stuff that's affecting the volume of it, how everything is working together. Creative effects like reverb, delay, flange, or phase, or ring shifter, anything you want to in that realm, they should still be used the way you want them to, but after this chain of EQ compressor, EQ, or just EQ compressor. You want to be, because you want those effects to be, you want them to be affected by the good quality audio files. So say you're compressing and EQing something, you want to put the reverb on the good sounding file with it's rather than the one that doesn't sound so great before the EQ and the compressor. Another thing to pay attention to when it comes to mixing is to definitely pay attention to volume faders. Now, this isn't to say in this tutorial I'm putting this low so it doesn't destroy your ears when I play it. But in a normal world, this would be up at the normal volume, and you want to make sure you don't edit the master track volume fader normally. But I'm gonna cover that more in the mastering tutorials. What I mean by that is, say we're gonna bring up the mixer real quick. All these things, all these faders, these isn't where they normally were because we're using the master track, so they were how they were before I even put them in. But when you're seeing this, remember this is a pseudo mixer, but say this was the vocal, this were the drums, this were anything you'd want to see, you would start learning that each of these kind of has a relative place in the mix to other ones. So the drums are always going to be a little bit louder than instruments. And for some mixes, you'll get used to it from artist to artist, but the vocals might be a little bit louder than the drums. And then everything has its kind of placement relative to the other instruments, if that makes sense. If you have any questions for that, leave that in the comments, and I'll definitely be able to clarify that for you. Again, remember to not mess with the master fader. You can, but it's not the proper way to do it and the clearest and clean-cut way to do it. The best way to mess with the volume for the master fader is with the effects, like I mentioned before in the last episode. There was gain, multi-band compression, EQ, adaptive limiting, normal limiting, all that good stuff. But just to remember, you can kind of see, even for all of these, that say if I soloed this one and pulled up its EQ, this is the bass track for it. If I were to bring this up, you can kind of see where it's hitting. It's a bass, so it's hitting lower, above 200. They're definitely cutting at about 8-9K, making room, I'm assuming, for vocals, hi-hats, other drums. But yeah, the only thing really taking up the sub in this entire mix would be the bass. So just think about that when you're mixing your next track, that everything really, again, and I know I'm saying this over and over, and you probably think monopoly, I can't talk. You probably think I'm an obnoxious motherfucker for telling you this so much, and like, oh, I'm not learning from these tutorials. But believe me, you need to know this. Keep doing it. Keep practicing, finding its own place. Just do it. I guarantee you it'll help you, and I guarantee you it'll make you better. You just have to practice finding and training your ear to find the best place for each specific instrument and track. That'll make for the best master track. Now, the next episode, we're going to be doing mastering in depth, so I will see you guys then if you decide to click the next video. For sure. Thanks.